Might as well tell this story. When I was very little, my family brought me along on a trip to visit my aunt. We all slept in her apartment, which had never shown any signs of paranormal or supernatural activity before, and never has since. One night, my aunt woke up to a noise. She left her bed to check it out, and when she came out into the living area where we were all sleeping, she saw a cloaked figure standing over me. It was doing some sort of motion with its hands, wiggling its fingers. At first, my aunt thought it was my grandmother, so she called out, "Mom?" But when she spoke, the figure turned to her, and she saw that it was an old man with a large white beard. Before she could react, he vanished into thin air. My aunt was terrified after this. She woke my mom, and they decided not to tell me about it because they didn't want to scare me. I didn't find out until several years later, and I still think about it often. I believe that my aunt saw something that night, wiggling its bony fingers. For the life of me, though, I wouldn't be able to guess what it was. This happened when I was 8 years old. I was at my grandfather's house, probably around 6 or 7 p.m., when I heard my great-grandmother's voice saying that she loved me and to take care of my younger sister. 5 minutes after I heard her voice, someone called our phone to tell us that my great-grandmother had died that night. I grew up in a 3-bedroom house. My parents got the master bedroom. Brothers and I got the next biggest room. My aunt got the smallest room. She lives in that room for years before she passes away in a car accident. Her boyfriend was driving them to a party when an 18-wheeler crashed and killed them on the freeway. Mom was devastated. My aunt's room remained untouched for a while. During that time, I used to hear stuff in that room a lot. The room had hardwood floors. My bed was right up against the wall. At night, I could hear footsteps through the wall, the distinct sound of someone pacing the floors. Sometimes, I would hear the spring mattress creaking too, like someone was lying down in it. The scariest experience I had was when I got up in the middle of the night to use the restroom and heard those footsteps in my aunt's room from the hall. The house was dark and everyone else was asleep. I hurried to the bathroom, did my business, and was returning to my room when I heard the doorknob to my aunt's room rattling. Not violently or anything, but it sounded very loud in the silence. I froze and stared at the door. I could see the doorknob jiggling. After a moment, it stopped, and I heard footsteps retreating away from the door. I bolted to my room and fell asleep hiding under the covers. Eventually, my aunt's old room was finally emptied. All the ghostly activity stopped after that. I wonder if my aunt's spirit was trapped in that room by her belongings maybe. Once we got rid of all of her stuff, I never heard anything again. The next story comes from Wales, and it ends with a summary of a creature from Welsh folklore. I've tried to track down the correct pronunciation of this entity, but I'm not going to pretend that I speak Welsh. The entity's name appears to be something like Cahareth or Cahareth. For this story, I'll use Cahareth, but Welsh speakers are free to offer corrections. My brother and I went walking to a secluded beach in Glamorgan, Wales. It's a walk of a few miles along rural lanes, and the beach itself is only accessible on foot through a forest or along the cliffside. The forest is home to an old folly in a clearing, and the immediate area has a lifeguard weathering monitoring station, which is largely unmanned throughout the year. There's also an abandoned summer camp that's been left to rot, and there are overgrown and disheveled World War II pillbox positions, which you can still find. The entire area, in fact, was once an Iron Age promontory fort. The defensive mounds are still present in the forest. This county is steeped in history from all ages of Britain and is also one of the most haunted in all of the UK. So it's got its fair share of tales of things that go bump in the night. But I digress. So my brother and I are chilling at this beach I mentioned, sipping Stella and shooting the shit. The beach is a rocky place, illuminated by a power station to the far east of the bay. I decide to go stretch my legs and walk west. You can walk for miles without seeing anybody, until you hit the more popular beach a few miles away. It was pitch black and hard progress because of all the rocks and the cliff fall from the limestone cliffs that surround the area. This coastline is famous for wreckers because of how dangerous the Bristol Channel can be along this particular stretch. While walking along, it seemed to get darker and darker ahead of me, to the point where it looked pitch black. I could barely see anything at all without a flashlight. I got the most overwhelming sense of spine-prickling unease and danger I've ever felt, and I'm not the kind to ignore instinct. So I turn and head back to where I left my brother, all the while keeping a glance over my shoulder. When I had my brother in sight, I find him hopping up and down and gesticulating wildly at me, but I can't hear him over the roar of the waves until I get closer. He's shouting, "Did you see that? Are you okay?" I ask him what he's on about, and he describes this. "I thought someone was throwing a flare at you off the cliff," he says. "I saw an orb of light headed towards you, but it wasn't giving off any light like a flare would, and it was moving slowly, so I was confused. It sorta dripped light behind it, like a liquid." Now, I didn't see anything of that sort while I was walking, but I did mention to him the unusual feeling of dread which made me turn around and leave. So we both decide it's time to go home, and we leave pretty darn quick. The only way back is through the forest, but the paths are well maintained, so it's an easy walk. We've got the flashlight on as we make our way along, and we're feeling a little spooked when we hear this sudden shriek, a woman's shriek. We have foxes in this area, and it was not that kind of cry, and there are no wildcats that make those horrific woman in distress sounds like in the US. I cut my flashlight off. Me and my brother stare at each other, trying to figure out where that scream is coming from. It's a constant, consistent female scream, like someone playing the same soundbite over and over every 3 seconds. We realize that the shrieking is coming from behind us, from the beach, along the path we just came down, and it's getting closer and closer to us, quick. We sprinted like fuck out of those woods, and we didn't stop until we were closer to home, on the main road. I was farther up ahead, with my brother bringing up the rear, and after we made it to the main road, my brother says to me that as we were running, he turned and saw a sickly sort of light moving back into the forest. We didn't really talk about it after that, just chalked it up as one of those odd experiences that you get when you live in a place like this. Ghost sightings and supernatural occurrences are more common in Glamorgan than people want to admit. But while looking up the area, I happened on an article that was dated a few weeks prior to our trip up there. The article mentioned that a rather popular local TV presenter jumped to his death from one of the cliffs there. Apparently, he jumped from the same area where I was out walking, the same area where I felt the sense of dread and turned back. Years later, while reading up on local folklore, I came across something called the Caharith. Quote, Caharith emerges as one of the most captivating death omens in Welsh folklore. The creature's mournful moaning, usually heard from a distance, carries a sense of impending doom. The sound of the Caharith resonating along a street is believed to signify multiple impending deaths, while its presence near the sea warns of a fatal shipwreck. Encounter with the Caharith is described as terrifying, as it appears as a male or female figure with disheveled hair, pointed black teeth, withered arms, and a bone-chilling shriek. Death typically follows in its wake, often claiming a close friend or family member rather than the witness themselves.